Okay, all right. So, first of all, the plan for this week and next week, really quick, I want to explain that again. And so, your test is officially open as of now, and they will stay open till 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday. Okay, so you can choose when you would like to take that test. It covers the first 3 units that we finished last Wednesday. Now, please don't wait till too late to do the test. Last semester when we had to put the last exam online, I had a couple students who waited till like 10:30 Wednesday night to start taking this test, and then they ran into problems, and then they emailed me at 11:45. I'm not gonna finish. What am I doing? It's like, well, yeah. If you wait till the absolute last minute to have something happen, that's gonna be pretty tough. I'm not gonna sit in front of my computer that late just to wait in case somebody has an issue, right? So. Even though it's open till Wednesday night, don't wait till Wednesday late night to start taking the test, okay? Now, there is a practice quiz I put up on iLearn right next to the test for you to just make sure your computer and softwares will work with the proctorial properly, okay? So I think the school is recommending that you use Chrome, and there's an extension for Proctorio you need to download and make sure it works. Last semester, I only had a few students that had issues, and most of the time the issue was somehow they did not install the Proctorio extension properly or correctly. So once they installed that, then everything worked fine. So if you're having an issue, try to check and see if you're using Chrome and if your Proctorio extension installed correctly. And if you still have problems, of course, let me know. But that quiz, I put a due date on by noon today because I want to make sure you guys got it all done and in time for your test. And it's just a couple very simple questions for you to mostly make sure your Proctorio is set up, but I am giving it a couple points to make it worth your effort. So it shouldn't take more than the questions themselves shouldn't take you more than 20 seconds, but maybe you'll take 5 minutes to set Proctorio up if you haven't done that before. But once you set that up, then you'll be ready for exam 1. Okay, and then. Since you're here, I assume you saw the announcement that initially, since there's no class on Monday of next week, I put the reading and concept check quiz for the next unit due on this Wednesday, which is our class day. But then I thought about it. I was like, well, we have time and flexibility, so I pushed it back till Friday, and so that way, hopefully, you don't have to worry about the next unit just yet. After your test, then you can start reading about the next unit and just get things done. I will post a video either today or tomorrow, the latest, on the next unit, and then you guys can watch it when you're ready. But since next Monday is Memorial Day holiday, we will not have class, so we'll go back to our Wednesday only schedule and do that for the next 4 weeks before the second test. So anyway, everything will go back to normal. So I won't see you till next Wednesday after today's class. Okay, so that's what's happening going forward. And today I am not doing top hat because in theory the test already started, so somebody could have taken the test and be done with it. I don't think anybody has, but because that I'm not requiring attendance for the day. But I'm glad you're here because the review usually is valuable. So, okay.
So we don't have class on Wednesday.
No, not this Wednesday because normally, the first day of each unit is our video day. You watch the video and you read the chapters and etc. Okay. So yeah, our next class will be next Wednesday. Okay. All right. Okay. So now has everybody seen the test review guide? Did everybody find it on iLearn? I guess who did not find it? Okay, everybody found it? Great. Then in that case, I will not share my screen. I want you to pull it up, and so that way I can share my screen with my second account you see logged on here, so that I can draw and write instead of just sharing that screen with all the topics. So if you pull that up, okay, um, what we want to do is to for you to ask questions from either this review guide or your own studying. And the only requirement I have is let's go by unit, so we don't jump back and forth, back and forth. So let's start with Unit 1. Unit 1 is the first 3 chapters listed there. So again, if you don't remember, is in I learn in a folder called Test Materials. So if you log into our class, then on the main page, the very first module there is called Test Materials. Then click on Test 1 Review Guide. Okay. Then now look at Unit 1. Unit 1 is the only one with 3 chapters, and see if you have any questions. We start with by defining what resources are and go through the effects of trade.
I had a question about the exam. Are we going to need a calculator?
No, so the Proctorio will have um, a calculator built in, because with this method of doing the exam, if you look around and use other things, and it's gonna flag you for cheating the software. So there is a built-in calculator in Proctorio that I've activated, and so you can just use that. Okay.
You also said we are allowed a 3x5, right? Note
Right.
card.
Yeah. So that. Yeah. When Cheyenne asked me that question, reminded me. So about the test itself, um, I mentioned this last time, but a couple of you missed class last Wednesday. So there are 55 multiple choice questions. Okay, I will count your best 50 as your score, so you have 5 chances to miss. Now, I also told the class, don't get used to this. It won't be the case every time. Okay, this is the first test you're taking from me, so I know you don't know what to expect and etc. So I'm giving you a little bit more of a leeway, but I'll wean you off. There won't be any by the time we get to the final. But you do have 55 questions, all multiple choice, and I've checked the test and reviewed it on iLearn to make sure everything works, so there shouldn't be any technical issues. And then, yeah, you are allowed a 3x5 note card, but before you begin, make sure you hold it up and show it to the camera so it's recorded early on, and that way when you look at something or not something, look at that note card, because the program might still flag you, but all these recordings of your exams will be reviewed by testing center staff, and then they'll know that okay, that's an allowed piece of resource that you're using. Okay. All right, and then
Question. So,
yeah.
so it sounds like the questions are not going to be pulled from like our textbook quizzes.
No, you don't. You don't. You're not gonna see quiz questions that you have already done. No. Yeah, but they're gonna be similar
Okay.
questions. Okay. Yeah. Yep. Okay. All right. Any questions from Unit One? Like I said, I put the responsibility on you, so you have to ask me questions. I'm not gonna try to redo the whole class for 3 weeks.
Boss,
Yeah, Faith.
I do have a question that might help me like study better, but I'm not sure if there's a way for you to do this or if you're willing to do this. Is it possible to have access to the homework again?
Yeah, you should be able to
The homework and
review
the
the homework.
well, you can only see like at least on the last time I checked, you could only see like one of them, but you're not able to like work through them from like scratch again.
Oh, I
and
don't.
like to be able to
Yeah.
like move the different graphs and stuff? No,
No,
not
you
possible.
cannot work through them, but you can check the different versions of the questions you did. You should be able to. Yeah, but there's no way for you to actually work through them again and somehow type in answers and etc. because that's the only way for you to be graded, and you've already been graded, so you cannot go back and kind of delete your previous answers and redo those questions again that way. But you should have access to review all the questions that you have done before, just to look at them. Okay. All right. Any questions from the the unit? This is going to be a fast review if everybody feels comfortable with all the questions on there.
Can we talk about the three fallacies of economic analysis real quick?
Yeah, certainly. So let me share my screen on my other account here. Okay, so the three fallacies we said the first one is the fallacy of correlation for causation, right? So that's the one I gave you the example of the 5G map and the coronavirus map, if you recall, right? So clearly things are correlated, but that does not mean one causes the other. Okay, many things we can observe a correlation, meaning they have some kind of a connection, but that does not mean one must cause the other. So the second one is a fallacy of composition. Okay, that's the one where when you assume what's true for one person must be true for the entire population. Okay, and again we see a lot of examples that why this is not true, right? So you can think of maybe, let's say if you are still in Rexburg and you got really bad cabin fever, you decided that you're going to go to Utah for fun for a couple days, and then you look up on Google Maps. The best way for you to go as an individual is to hop onto I-15 and drive 80 miles an hour down to Salt Lake City, and that's the fastest way, easiest way. But let's say if somehow all the students at BYU Idaho are cooped up too much after this last weekend, and they decide to do the same thing. So, all several thousand jump on I-15 at the same time today, trying to go down to Utah. Then it's probably no longer going to be the easiest and fastest way to Utah anymore, right? So that's the fallacy of composition. Okay. The third one is ignoring the fallacy of ignoring secondary effects. Right, so we see some of that with the current situation of unemployment. Congress passed that stimulus package back in March and said, okay, we are going to increase the amount of unemployment benefits by $600 per week. So whatever your state is paying you, and we'll put another $600 on top of it, and then instead of paying you for however long your state allows, and some states give you as little as like less than 8 weeks of unemployment benefits, and some states give you as long as like 4 or 5 months. But the point is, the government said we're going to extend that through the end of July, regardless of how short your state does it. And so that means for a lot of workers being unemployed now, they make over $1,000 a week on their unemployment benefits, right? So I don't know if you guys have read this, but I've read in several articles where now there are workers who refuse to go back to work because they got furloughed because of coronavirus. Now things are opening up. They're like, I'm not going to go back because I make $26 an hour doing nothing, right, until the end of July. And going back, I'm only going to make $15 an hour. So yeah, I'm gonna write this out, and so that's a secondary effect that I don't think the lawmakers intended on causing. Right? They were hoping to help people through this coronavirus situation, but now instead they've created this phenomenon that a lot of workers saying, "Forget it, I'm not gonna go back to work and make only $15, while I can milk the government cow for another 3 months and make $26 an hour, right? So, okay. Does that answer your question, Isaac?
Can you go over real correlation for causation again?
The correlation for causation? Okay, that's just saying that oftentimes things are connected. We call that a correlation, but just because they're connected does not mean one causes the other, right? So another example is if you look at random things like reading ability and shoe sizes, right? Then you can see there's a clear correlation. The bigger your feet are, the more likely you're gonna read better, right? Now, that is because, well, the bigger your feet are, then generally speaking, the older you are, at least when comparing children and teenagers and adults. So that's the true cause behind the scene. But if you simply observe that correlation of feet size and reading ability, then you would conclude that NBA players should be the smartest people walking the face of the earth, right? But in reality, that's not the cause. The size of your feet is not causing you to read better. It's just correlated to your reading ability because it's correlated with your age that actually matters, right? Okay? All right? Any other questions? So now, to me, the hardest part of this unit is all about comparative advantage and not circular flow, PPF, okay, and that stuff. So, take a look and see if you have any questions.
I have a question on the second to last one,
Okay.
the basic tax principles and tax incidence.
Okay, yeah, so this is something I asked you to read on your own. If you recall in that video, I said, the different participants of the circular flow model. I was not gonna just list everything you could read easily in your book. So this is something related to the government, functions of the government, right? So the government collects taxes to as their income, and that's how they function and survive. And tax principles, there are two. This is kind of the logic on how we justify collecting taxes. Okay, so the two tax principles. Okay, the first one is called the ability to pay principle. Okay, so the name kind of says it, and this logic of how we collect taxes is, well, the bigger of ability you can pay, the more you will pay. Okay, so the example for this is your federal income tax. Right, the higher your income, not only the more dollars you pay, but the higher of percentage you pay out of your income. Right, so that's based on the ability to pay tax principle. We say, the richer you are, the more of a responsibility you have to pay taxes. Okay, so that's one principle, and the second one is called the benefits principle, or sometimes called the benefits received principle. Okay, so this is saying that if you receive benefits from something that the government can provide, then you pay taxes. The more benefit you receive, the more taxes you pay. Okay, so the example for this one is gasoline tax. If you don't know, gas is fairly heavily taxed. That's why even though gas prices, a few weeks ago dropped to really, really low, even negative, or oil prices dropped to negative, gasoline never dropped to below, well, let's see, what's the lowest? I saw a picture, I don't know whether it's true or not, in Texas, where they're really close to the Gulf, and gas is easily accessible and cheap and processed right there. and it went down to like 25 cents a gallon, right? But anyway, most places, it stayed well over $1. In Idaho, southeastern Idaho, the cheapest I saw was $1.45. That's because these these gasoline sales prices include a federal tax of about 19 cents a gallon, and then each state has their own taxes. So Idaho, if I remember correctly, Idaho taxes about 27 cents a gallon or something like that. So together you have 40, 50 cents per gallon of tax in there. So it will never go down below that because the government, regardless of how cheap the gas becomes, will always tax you, right? But the point is, well, gas taxes are used for road constructions and maintenance and etc. So if you drive, then you receive the benefits of having these roads and bridges maintained for you, and so you receive that benefits. The more you drive, the bigger benefits you receive. Then that means the more you drive, the more gas taxes you pay, right? If you don't have a car, you don't drive at all, you don't use the interstate system much, then you don't pay this tax. Okay. Faith asked if there's another example other than gas taxes. Yes, I'm sure there's many examples because we tax so many different things, but at the moment I can't think of one from the top of my head. Okay. But anyway, so that's those are the two tax principles, okay, and tax incidence. Okay, refers to the fact that just because you are paying the tax, it does not mean you're carrying the burden of the tax. Okay, excuse me. What I mean by that is, well, when it comes to collecting taxes, okay, somebody needs to write a check and send it to the government, right? But just because you're writing the check does not mean you're actually carrying the whole burden of the tax amount you're paying. For example, if let's say that the government decides to increase sales tax in Idaho from 6% to 9%, okay? Now, sales tax in Idaho and many other states, excuse me, are paid by the consumer, right? Because when you go to Walmart, you buy milk, and then on top of the $2 a gallon, you pay then 12 cents in taxes, and it's listed on the receipt for you. So you're responsible for making the payment. But okay, if the government increases the sales tax by another 3%, what's going to happen is a lot of producers will say, well, we cannot simply raise our prices by 3%, right? Just let the consumers cover this whole tax. If that's the case, we might lose too much sales. Okay. So instead, what they'll do is they say, hey, to prevent us from losing too many customers, let us take a hit and lower our price by 3%, and so that way the total after-tax price our consumers pay won't change, so they'll continue to buy our products, right? Or they say out of the 3%, we'll lower price by 1.5%, and then they'll end up paying 1.5% more than before, but they won't take as big of a hit, right? So whatever the reasoning's going on is that even though you are paying the sales tax, but producers often would lower the price just to carry some of the burden for you as well, so you don't take the whole hit and they don't lose sales. So the tax incidence tells you who bears the tax burden. Okay, so if in our example, if the producers of milk, if the dairy farms actually lower their price by 3% as a result of that tax, then even though you are the one writing the check or sending the money to the government, they are bearing that tax burden. Okay, the producers are bearing the tax burden. So in that case, the tax is paid by you, but the tax incidence falls on the producers. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, all right. Any other questions from Unit 1?
Yeah, Brother Mock, can we go over the comparative advantage and absolute advantage?
Okay. Yeah, so comparative advantage, well, let's start with absolute advantage. That one is easier, right? So absolute advantage, how do we determine that again? Does anybody remember?
Whoever has the lowest opportunity cost?
Nope, that's not absolute advantage.
Isn't it whoever can perform it better?
Okay, so by performing better, what do you mean, Bridger?
Like it can produce more in whatever or whatever it's producing.
Okay, yeah, good. So absolute advantage is when you can produce more given the same resources, right? So more products, okay, given same resources. So it's looking at your ability to produce in terms of quantity. Okay. Another way to think of this, if you can produce more products given the same resources, then that means each product must cost you less resources to make, right, per product. Because if you have 100 workers and you can make 100 products, that means each product costs you one worker to make. And if I have 100 workers and I can make 200 products, then that means each of my product only costs me half of a worker to make, right? So both mean the same thing in that case. Now, so to determine absolute advantage, we simply look at, okay, given the same resources, who can make more, okay? And then is it possible for a country to have absolute advantage in everything, or for a producer? Doesn't have to be a country, okay? All right, Isaac is nodding and Luke is nodding, right? Yeah, so the answer is yes. A country can have absolute advantage, or a producer can have absolute advantage in everything, okay? Now, comparative advantage, okay? So, Luke, this is the one that you kind of answered yourself. This is whoever has the comparative advantage has the lower opportunity cost of production. So it's not looking at how much resources you use to produce a product, but it's looking at how much opportunity cost you have when you produce a product. Now, opportunity cost, we said in general, means what you have to give up when you choose to do something, right? So it's the best alternative you foregone. So best alternative you're giving up. Now, translated into this setting of what we're using here, then that means when you choose to produce something, okay, your opportunity cost is how much of a different product you could have made with the resources you're using, right? If you, let's say if your choices, well, let's just do an example, right? So let's say that I don't know, let's say you're trying to participate in some kind of charity auction in your local area. Okay, and so maybe a bake-off auction, and you and your mom are both participating, right? So let's say, for Luke, I'm just going to use you as the example since you asked the question, right? So Luke, in 24 hours, can bake, 12 batches of brownies, okay, or 12, batches of cookies for the auction, okay? And your mom can, in 24 hours can do 48 batches of brownies, okay, or 24 batches of cookies, okay? Now the question is, who has the comparative advantage in what? And what should you do in terms of specializing, right? So the way to figure it out, we said, okay, well, for Luke, okay, since 12 batches of brownies or 12 batches of cookies represent the best he can do in 24 hours, okay, then I know 12 brownies equal 12 cookies for Luke, because either one represents the best he can do in 24 hours. Okay, so if we're trying to find out, let's say, the opportunity cost of cookies, then you divide both sides by 12, and you get 1 brownie equals 1 cookie. So whenever Luke bakes 1 batch of cookies, he gives up the opportunity of making 1 batch of brownies, right? And for mom, okay, she can make 48 batches of brownies in 24 hours or 24 batches of cookies. So these two equal in value because both represent the best she can do in 24 hours. Okay, so if we want to find out the opportunity cost of cookies for her, we divide both sides by 24, and you get 2 brownies equals 1 cookie. So whenever mom tries to make a batch of cookies, she actually gives up 2 batches of brownies that she could have made with that same amount of time. Okay, so here then, who has the opportunity? Comparative advantage in cookie baking? Luke does, right? Because Luke's opportunity cost is lower. When Luke bakes 1 batch of cookie, he only gives up 1 brownie, and when mom bakes 1 batch of cookies, she actually gives up 2 batches of brownies. So, according to our trade theory, then if they both want to participate in this cook-off, in this bake-off charity auction, then Luke should focus on making cookies, and mom should focus on making brownies, and that way they can maximize their production. Okay, instead of doing both together. Okay. Now, so when it comes to comparative advantage, we said nobody can have comparative advantage in everything. Okay. Once you determine one comparative advantage, the other producer must have the other comparative advantage, just based on how the math works. Okay. Now, 90% of the questions you see are going to be similar to this, where you are given the maximum amount of production, and you just figure out the ratios of for opportunity cost with this way of calculation. Okay. Occasionally, you're going to see a question set up a little bit differently, right? So where instead of telling you the maximum quantities of production you can do given certain amount of resources, you can have information on how much one product takes in resources, and then be asked to figure out comparative advantage, just like what we just did. So in that case, it'll be something different than what you're used to seeing, but it's actually easier, right? So in that case, what you'll see is I'll say something like for Luke, okay, 1 batch of brownie takes 1 hour of work, okay, and 1 batch of cookies takes 1 hour of work. And for mom, okay, 1 batch of brownies takes 15 minutes, okay, and or not 15 minutes, I guess half an hour. All right, let me erase that to keep things consistent. It keeps 30 minutes, and 1 batch of oh yeah, I did Luke wrong. Luke should be 2 hours because I said 24 hours. You can make this much, right? So okay, so 1 brownie for Luke is 2 hours. 1 cookie is also for 2 hours. For mom, 1 batch of brownies 30 minutes. 1 batch of cookies is 1 hour. Okay, if I give you this information, I can ask you the same thing. Who has the comparative advantage in what? Okay, now this is actually easier because all you need to do is to divide the amount of resources by these 2 different types of products to figure out the opportunity cost. You can say, okay, for mom, 1 cookie equals 1 hour, and in 1 hour, if I divide by 30 minutes, it's going to tell me, oh, that's going to be 2, okay, brownies. Okay, so it's actually simpler to do, but that's another possibility you can see of this type of questions. Okay, now we said, a couple other things that are related to this type of question that we saw is that once you determine comparative advantage, then we said that we should specialize and then come together to trade. And the terms of trade there's a mutually beneficial range. Do you remember how to get that? Okay, how do we find the terms of trade where both Luke and his mom will be happy to trade their products with each other? So, according to our discussion just now, what is Luke going to specialize in producing?
Cookies.
Cookies.
Cookies, right? And then Luke's mom is going to do brownies. So that means for Luke, he's going to be selling cookies for brownies. So what is the minimum price Luke is going to ask for when he sells his cookies to his mom in exchange for brownies?
One batch.
Yeah, Luke is going to say, hey, Mom, you got to give me at least one batch of brownie for each batch of my cookies because my opportunity cost of making one cookie is one brownie, right? So I got to get at least one brownie for one cookie to cover my cost. So Luke is saying, okay, the value of one cookie needs to be greater than or equal to one brownie. Okay. Mom, on the other hand, will be buying cookies with brownies, and what is she going to say? What's her bottom line for payment with brownies? What's the maximum she's willing to pay? Faith said 2, right? So Luke's mom is going to say, fine, honey, right? I'm going to pay you for cookies, but I'm not going to pay you more than 2 batches brownies for each batch of cookies, because if I pay more than that, then that is going to be higher than my own opportunity cost. It's not worth it for me. So mom is saying 1 cookie is less than or equal to 2 brownies in value, right? So this is the range that both will agree to and both will be mutually benefited when they come together and trade their products. Okay, so to find this range, you always find the difference of the opportunity costs of the 2 producers with the same product. So here we're trying to find the difference. This range exists in between the opportunity costs of cookies for Luke and Mom. Okay. Now we talked about in class that if Luke is using all the negotiation tricks he learned in marketing to talk to Mom, and somehow he convinced Mom that paying 4 brownies for each cookie is a great deal. Okay, then Luke can gain way more in this trade, and then Mom actually will take a loss trading with Luke, right? So it's possible, in theory at least, to push this outside of the terms of trade outside of this boundary. In that case, only one partner in trade will gain, and the other side of a trade partner will actually lose. Right? Okay. All right. Any other questions from Unit 1? Ready to move on to Unit 2? Okay, all right. So Unit 2 is on supply and demand, and then the introduction of concepts for macro. Okay. Okay, so take a look and see if you have any questions.
Brother Ma, can we talk about the 3 types of economic indicators and give some examples?
Okay. Yeah. Actually, I just thought of something from Unit 1. Did we talk about sunk cost? I don't think we talked about sunk cost specifically. Right? Does anybody remember what sunk cost is?
A sunk cost is something that you've already spent that shouldn't influence your current decisions.
Okay, very good. All right, so that's a concept from Chapter 1, and it talks about how a sunk cost is a cost that already occurred. No matter what you do, you cannot recover it. So, like Daniel said, you should not let it impact your decision making. So you should ignore it when you make a decision, right? So, for example, if let's say, I don't know, let's say the piano guys are your favorite performing group, and they were going to have a concert in your area, but then because of coronavirus, it got canceled, and they said, hey, this concert has been postponed till next year, but I'm sorry, but we're not going to refund any tickets, okay? And if you want to come see us again, you'll have to buy a new ticket, right? And then a lot of people might say, well, I already spent 50 bucks, okay, and I don't want to spend another 50 bucks, but in this example, the $50 you already spent, and if it's non-refundable, no matter what you do, it's gone. So, if you don't consider the emotional damage you have toward the piano guys from this kind of event, the economic logic should be, well, if it was worth $50 for you to see them the first time, then it should be worth another $50 for you to see them again the second time, because even though you feel like you lost $50, but no matter what you do, you cannot recover the first 50, and you should just let it go, okay? That's sunk cost. Okay, you should not let that impact your decision making. Okay, because it's not like if you somehow boycott, piano guys from this point on, and they will give you your $50 back. If that's the case, you can do something about it. But if no matter what you do, the $50 is non-refundable, then do not let that impact your decision making at all. Okay. All right. So anyway, I just remembered that that point I was going to talk about and forgot. Okay. All right. Any questions before we answer Isaac's question? Okay, so the three types of economic indicators. Okay, so an economic indicator is something that tells you about what is going on in the economy, right? So there are three types. One is called a leading economic indicator. This is what tells you. This is what tells you about what is to come in the economy. Okay, and so there are things that usually will be leading the way of economic changes, if you will. One of these leading economic indicators, and as an example, is the amount of new home constructions. Usually, if we see a dip in how many new homes are being built, then a recession often follows. Because the first thing people get rid of is building a new house when things start to change and tighten. Okay, so if you see a dip in new home construction, usually within a few months, there's going to be an economic downturn that follows. Okay, so we call that a leading economic indicator. Okay, and another one is called coincidental economic indicator. Okay, and a coincidental economic indicator is what is telling you, about what's going on right now. Okay, so this is a measurement of how the economy is doing at live, with live events, right? So the stock market can be one, right? So the stock market reflects the value of assets given all the currently available information, right? So when the stock market crashes, that usually means, well, something is not going well currently, right? Like last week, when President Trump just randomly said in an interview that he's mad at China. In fact, he might just cut all ties with China completely, right? So diplomatic relationship gone, and all the companies that have production factories or partners in China, he's going to cut it all. And as soon as he said that, right, the stock market dropped like 500 points within the next 20 minutes, right? So this is reflecting the panic of investors. Here I'm using investors as a loose term, not economic term, because of what's currently going on. The president, says something dumb in public, and it caused panic in the stock market, and it's causing harm to the economy, right? Okay, and then the last kind is called a lagging economic indicator, and as you can imagine, this is the kind of things that tell us what went on that we weren't aware of. So the best example is the unemployment rate, which we'll talk plenty more about in the next unit. Right? So the unemployment rate is something we have to collect data and calculate and figure out after it has happened. And it is reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they report it on the first Friday of every month for the previous month. So, right now our unemployment rate is at 14.7% or something like that, right? And that's for the last month of April. Okay, so by beginning of May, we figured out, oh man, April was bad, right? Unemployment rate went from 3 point something percent in February, early March to nearly 15% in April. So it was a huge jump, but even though you could have known it was bad, you didn't know how bad until after the fact. Okay, so these are the three types of economic indicators. Okay. All right. Any other questions from Unit 2? All right. So this is the one with the supply and demand. So to me, the difficult part that I see is the difference between movement along a curve and a shift in a curve. Okay. Then simultaneous shifts of supply and demand. Okay. And then those are probably the hardest part of this unit, but I'll leave the questions to you.
If we want to use like a piece of paper or something, is that allowed? Or do we have
Scratch
to?
paper?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I haven't thought about it, but yeah, you should be able to use some scratch paper, but you need to show your scratch. I would say no more than 2 pages, and you have to show it to the camera before the test to make sure there's nothing on there. Okay. Yeah, you should be okay. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Any questions from Unit 2? I'll give you some time to look over it. Okay. Now, just since my eyes landed on price ceiling, price floors, just really quick, what's the first thing you need to do when you do a question about price ceiling, price floors?
Check if it's binding.
Check if it's binding. Very good. Because if it's non-binding, what's happening in the market? Nothing. Right. The market will stay at equilibrium. Okay. And the market will only be different if it is binding. Okay.
Brother Mo,
Yeah.
can we go over the one? I think it's the last question for Unit 2. Be able to define federal budget. That one.
Oh, deficit. Okay. Yeah. So, again, this is something like we mentioned many times before. Chapter 5 is just this blanket chapter just to introduce concepts, and then in the future we'll talk plenty more about all this. But the federal budget balance, so deficit or surplus, right? So the budget balance, okay, if it's a negative, we call that a deficit. Deficit. Okay, and if it's positive, we call this a budget surplus. But this is only 1 year's worth of government budget balance. Okay, and the budget balance, kind of like your own budget balance, equals your income minus your expenditures. Right? The government's income, we said before, is net taxes. Okay, and the expenditures is their government spending. So the budget balance equals net taxes minus government spending, and if it's a negative number, we say we have a budget deficit. If it's a positive number, we say we have a budget surplus. Okay. Now again, this is not something that necessarily relates to this test, but we said net taxes, okay, is your gross taxes denoted by a capital T minus transfer payments. Okay, TR is transfer payments, so T is gross taxes. Okay. Okay, TR is transfer payments. And we said transfer payments are things that the government just takes money from one group in society and gives the money to another group. So like Social Security, Medicare, or unemployment benefits, right? They just take money from taxpayers and give it to the unemployed. So we don't count that part as the government's income because they don't keep it. Okay. So net taxes is the gross taxes, the total they collect minus what they send away, and the rest is what they keep. Okay, and also we said that's not part of. We don't count that as government spending either because there's no production involved. Right, government spending is when they spend money on something and actually induce a production. But here they're just taking money from one group and giving it to another, so there's no production involved. Okay. Josh, you had your hand up?
All right, yeah, you just answered it. I was going to ask, why isn't it counted as government spending?
Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right. So, yeah. Okay. So that's budget balance, either deficit or surplus. Now, the federal government debt or national debt, okay, is the accumulation of all the previous years of budget balances together. And since for our government, we 99% of the time we run a deficit. Okay, so that means every year the government spends more money than the taxes that they collect. Then we have a gigantic total amount of national debt. Right, so I haven't even looked at where it is now, but based on where it was before, it's probably around $27 trillion now. And I don't know how many of you saw this Friday night. There's a new bill that the Democrats pushed called the called HEROES. It was a acronym for the full name of the bill, but it's another stimulus plan. And the Senate, which is controlled by Republicans, already said they're not going to pass this. But if this were to pass in the Senate, then it's going to be an additional $3 trillion of spending, and so that would push our national debt to $30 trillion. Okay, we'll talk about this plenty more when we get to that chapter in the future, but that's an unfathomable amount of money. Okay, because just to give you a quick idea, we hit 10 trillion in 2009. Okay, so now we're about to hit 30 trillion in 2020, and so it took us, well, maybe 2008. We hit the 10 trillion. I think end of 2008 and beginning of 2009-ish. So it took us 232 years to do the first 10 trillion, and we're about to, do the next 20 trillion in less than 12 years. So yeah, the spending is kind of out of control. Okay, and then let's see. Do you want to talk about stagflation and all that, Bridger? Okay, so stagflation, okay, is the situation where, okay, if you have your price level, remember we said with the whole economy we cannot just have a single price. Then instead of quantity, you have real GDP down here, okay, and aggregate demand looks just like your regular demand in shape. Then aggregate supply looks like this, just like your regular supply curve in shape, okay. Then together they determine the price level in the economy. That's the overall average prices, right? And then they determine where the real GDP is supposed to be. That's the amount of production we have, okay? Now, stagflation happens when you have a decrease in aggregate supply. Okay, so you have a decrease in aggregate supply. That means a leftward shift. Okay, and as a result, you can see that price level increases, which we call inflation, right? Inflation is when price level increases, and then you have a decrease in real GDP, which is what we call a recession, right? Because a recession happens when your GDP becomes lower than before. So this is what we call stagflation, and it is a made-up word, by economists, if you cannot tell, is a combination of stagnation and inflation. Stagnation refers to the fact that your GDP is not growing. Inflation is saying that your price level is increasing. And this is the most difficult situation an economy can find itself in. Okay, for for two reasons. One, from the human suffering side, okay, stagflation is hard because when you have a recession where your real GDP decreases, like the graph shows you, that means your unemployment rate is increasing, right? Because if you're not producing as much, real GDP measures the total value of how much your production is. If you're producing less, then you are letting go workers. You're laying off workers. So there's more people losing their jobs. Now, in the same time, there's inflation. So imagine yourself being laid off and everything becoming more expensive, right? So from a human suffering perspective, this is the worst possible because we have a recession, which means a large amount of workers are out of work. In the same time, things are becoming more expensive, so it's difficult. The second reason, which is the biggest reason for this to be the worst scenario for countries to find themselves in, is that government intervention generally is on, this relates to the rest of this question, government intervention is generally related on the demand side economics, and they can only shift the aggregate demand curve through government intervention. Okay, now shifting the aggregate demand curve here does not fix both problems, because you have unemployment and you have inflation, right? Because a recession means high unemployment, and price level increasing means inflation. Both are bad, but shifting aggregate demand cannot change both, right? So let's say that excuse me, you want to increase your real GDP back to normal. Okay, and by shifting aggregate demand like this, okay, you can see that your real GDP can go back to normal, but then what happens to your price level? Well, it goes even higher. So by fixing the real GDP, or by fixing unemployment, because real GDP is directly related to unemployment, okay, you're going to make inflation worse. Okay, now if let's say that you want to, okay, fix inflation, okay, and then you can go here. Oh, whoops, sorry, not there. You have to go here. Okay, that will take your inflation back in control, but you're gonna make the recession worse. Okay, that's because when the government intervenes, the reason they can only shift aggregate demand is because the government, the best they can do is say, hey, I will buy more or less of your products, but they cannot simply put a gun to the head of a company and say, hey, I don't know who's going to buy your product, you better start producing. Okay. In America, that's how revolutions get started, right? We're not going to let the government do that. So the government can only manipulate the real GDP through the aggregate demand side, but that also means if we get into a stagflation situation, then they cannot address both problems of inflation and unemployment simultaneously with the tools they have. Okay. Now, again, we will talk plenty more about how this works in future chapters, but for now, understand why this is difficult. Okay, and now there has only been one attempt in history to shift aggregate supply with government action, and it was attempted by Ronald Reagan, not Donald Trump, Ronald Reagan. And what he did was in the 1980s, so we were in a stagflation from the 70s into the early 80s, and he cut corporate taxes severely, and he was heavily criticized for it, right? Because again, nowadays we every time we attempt to cut the corporate side taxes, everybody's saying, well, this politician is in bed with the millionaires, and they're trying to save big corporate money. So politically, whenever you try to influence the aggregate supply side, it's pretty much political suicide, and very few politicians are willing to do it. But Donald Reagan did it, and it took years for the effects to show, but he was able to actually shift aggregate supply, to the right, which in this case would correct both problems, right? Because if you shift aggregate supply back to the right, then you can have a lower, price level and increase your real GDP, fixing both problems. But that was the only time a president had the guts to do it, and was able to do it. That's why, looking back, all the Republicans hail him as the superhero, and named that, Reaganomics, right? But at the time, it was not popular. In fact, when Reagan did this, shortly after that, it was George Bush Sr., George H.W. Bush, that became president, and Bush Sr. only served one term, because during his 4 years, the effects of this Reaganomics policy did not show. And when he ran for re-election, he faced this young guy, full of energy, sweet talker named Bill Clinton, right? And Bush Sr. was trying to show America that I'm tough. I'm trying to defend American values, and I went and kicked Saddam Hussein in his butt, right? I'm the true American hero, and I served in the military, blah blah blah. And Bill Clinton's campaign slogan was, "Is the economy stupid?" Right? Because he was saying, "Hey, sure, you're an American hero and whatever, nobody cares, right? And people care about putting food on their table," and it's true. And so Bill Clinton won the election, and now looking back, we have the data. Okay, so right around the time he took office, that's when the effects of Reaganomics finally started kicking in, and the economy recovered with the supply side stimulus. And so that kind of, he rode that wave into a 10-year economic expansion. So till this day, he brags about how he was the best president, because during his tenure there was no recession, right? But it's kind of funny to me that we either credit or blame the president single-handedly for what's going on in the economy. They don't have that much power. Okay? But Bill Clinton loves taking credits. It's just like, concerning budget balance that we were talking about here, okay, right here. And from 1998 to 2001, his second term, we had 3 years of budget surplus. The only 3 years in the last 50-something years that we had budget surpluses, right? So he brags about that all the time. But what really happened was, in 1995, we elected a Republican-controlled Congress. Both the House and the Senate were controlled by the Republicans, and they went against every single spending proposal Bill Clinton raised. So they did not let him spend a dime. Whatever he wanted to spend money on, we said no, or they said no. So combined with a good economy, which meant tax dollars were higher, okay, and then they said no to every spending, so tax dollars was increasing because the economy was doing well, and government spending was going down because the Congress would not approve any spending that Bill Clinton raised. So of course you ended up with a positive budget balance, right? So this was kind of a sign of his political inability at the time, because he was a lame duck president in his second term. Nobody cared about what he wanted to do anymore. But now he brags about the budget balance. He's like, I'm the only president that had 3 years of positive budget balance in the last 60 years, right? So anyway, it's kind of just interesting, all these economic concepts. Once you add the political element into it, gets twisted, right? So. Okay, all right. Okay, Any other questions from Unit 2? Yeah, Josh was made some comments about Bill Clinton in the chat. So. Okay, you ready to move on to Unit 3 then? Okay, well actually, you know what, looking at this I just remembered, I can't remember in the video, did I talk about how to solve the market conditions with equations?
I don't remember that.
Okay, so yeah, I don't remember talking about specifically in the video. I think I might have forgotten. So let me explain what I mean by know how to identify the equilibrium in a market and understand what sorry, not that one. See, be able to solve for market conditions with given equations. Okay, so normally to look at what happens in a market, you have your supply and demand curves, and then you shift it or move along it to figure out what happens to price and quantity, where the new equilibrium is, and so that's a key point. But occasionally, okay, you don't have to have a graph to do that. Okay, occasionally what you're going to be given are the equations where you look something like, it looks something like this: says quantity demanded equals, I'm just making numbers up, so bear with me, 300 minus 200p, right? And then, of course, some of you, once you see this, your head starts hurting and you're like, well, what's going on? All this is saying is quantity demanded has something to do with price, okay? And that relationship is negative because it's minus 200 times price, okay? So that's all it means. Quantity demanded is negatively related to price. Okay, so don't panic when you see this. And then you would also have an equation of something like, quantity supplied equals, well, not 300, I meant to say 3,000. Okay, so quantity supplied, let's say, is 1,000 plus, okay, 100p, right? Whatever, I'm making up numbers, but the point is, again, all this equation is saying is quantity supplied is positively related to price. Okay, and then you should know that these are correct because it's the law of demand and the law of supply say the same thing, right? So now, if I give you two equations like this, okay, there are two types of questions I can ask you. One is I can ask you, what is the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity in the market? Okay, how would you figure that out? If you have this information and ask you for the equilibrium in the market, what do you do?
Set them equal to each other.
Okay, very good. So at equilibrium, remember we said equilibrium is special because this is the only price at which quantity supplied and quantity demanded equal each other. So if I want you to solve for equilibrium, you just say, okay, I know at equilibrium, okay, QD equals QS. Okay, so then that means you can just plug it in. You say, okay, 3,000 minus 200p equals 1,000 plus 100p. Okay, you can see, well, this works because it's one equation with one unknown of p. You can solve for this, right? So if you add 200p on both sides, okay, on the left, then they would cancel out, and then you would have 3,000 equals 1,000, okay, plus 300p. Then if you minus 1,000 on both sides, okay, then that gives you 2,000 equals 1,000 here, cancel out with each other, 300p, and that tells you the price, which is the equilibrium price, because you started with the equilibrium condition right here. Okay, the price is 2,000 minus 300, and which is what, like $6.67. Okay, so that's how you solve for the equilibrium price. Once you have the price, what do you do to figure out what the quantity is?
You plug it back into your original equations.
Very good. Then you take this price and just plug it into this one or this one, because both will give you the same quantity because you're at equilibrium, right? And you can even verify that. Okay, so that's the first type of question I can ask you with the equations. Any questions here? Okay, you got to remember to start with the equilibrium condition. Okay, the second type of question is, instead of asking you to solve for equilibrium price and quantity, I can tell you, well, price is at $10. Okay. Now, am I at equilibrium? If not, do I have a surplus or a shortage? What do you do if that's the case? If I tell you where the price is and then ask you if I'm ask you to see if I'm at equilibrium or not, what do you do?
I solve it and then compare.
Okay, yeah, you will plug the price of $10 into these two equations and then see if QD and QS equal each other, right? And if they equal each other, you say, hey, I'm at equilibrium. If they do not equal each other, then you see which one is bigger, okay? When quantity demanded is bigger than quantity supplied, what do we call that?
Shortage.
A shortage, okay? Because there's more people want to buy than what's supplied. But if quantity supplied is bigger than quantity demanded, we call that a surplus, okay? And the size of your shortage or surplus is the difference between quantity demanded and quantity supplied. So a shortage will be QD minus QS, okay? That's your shortage. And QS minus QD is your surplus, okay? And then the first quantity has to be bigger than the second in either case, okay? But the point is you plug in P into those two equations and figure out what QD and QS equal to, and then figure either this or this out. Okay, so hopefully once I explain this doesn't seem too difficult, right? Questions or concerns about this? Okay, all right, then another thing I want to point out is just remember the language is very specific, right? Moving along the curve is a totally different thing than shifting in your curve, and the language reflects that, right? If you have a question that says, which of the following increases your supply, am I talking about a shifting supply curve or movement along the supply curve?
Of the demand curve?
It's a shift in your curve, right? Because a change in supply is a shift, and change in quantity supplied, that's a movement along your curve, right? So, so remember that language is very specific. So read very carefully when you do these questions. Okay. All right. Okay. Then let's move on to Unit 3. This is hopefully still very fresh on your mind. Okay. It's about GDP and then price indexes. Okay. Any questions? So we just did this last week.
Yeah, I saw these questions. I don't remember where I saw them. I think they might have been in the practice quizzes, but I realized I had no idea how to do them.
Okay.
Can I just read you one?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so it says, consider an economy that is in equilibrium with the government budget in deficit and with savings less than investments according to the circular flow model of GDP. And then, oh, sorry, and it says, yeah, according to the circular flow model of GDP, and then it gives 4 different scenarios that could happen. One of them says exports must be more than imports, exports must be less than imports, imports must be equal to exports, and imports must be equal to savings. And I know what the right answer is because it told me, but I have no idea how to actually do that.
Okay. All right. So this is, where we said at equilibrium in an economy, okay, we derived this in the video of why leakages need to equal injections, right? If you recall, we said, okay, at equilibrium, the expenditure model of GDP says GDP equals C plus I plus G plus net exports, which is exports minus imports, right? And we know at equilibrium that should equal your income approach of GDP, okay? And we said income is everybody's disposable private income, which is what we call disposable income, okay, plus your public income, so government income, that's net taxes, Okay, and then everybody with me so far? Right? Then we said, well, disposable income, so your personal after-tax income, there are only two ways you can dispose of it, right? You can consume it, okay, by spending it on consumption, or you can save it, okay? So if we plug this in, then this becomes C plus I plus G plus X minus M equals C plus S plus NT, right? Again, everybody with me so far? C is on both sides of the equation, so you can subtract C on both sides and C will disappear. Okay, so they cancel with each other. Okay, and then if you move minus M here to the other side, if you just add M imports on both sides, you can see plus M and minus M will cancel on the left. Then what you end up is investment plus government spending plus exports equals savings plus net taxes plus imports. Okay, so on the left hand side we call those things leakages, injections. On the right hand side those things are called leakages. So these are injections, these are leakages. So
I did exactly what you showed there, but I still had no idea how to come to the answer.
okay, I'm not there yet. Hold on. Okay, so this is also all this is saying that at equilibrium, okay, leakages equal injections. Okay, now in your question it said there is a government budget balance negative, so budget deficit, right? So that means G is greater than NT, right? Government spending is higher than government income, right? Because we said budget deficit or budget balance. We just said equals net taxes minus G, right? That's what we just said. A negative balance, so a budget deficit means then G must be bigger than NT, than your net taxes, right? Okay, and then what's the second one? It says savings is less than investment. Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so savings is less than investment. So that means investment is greater than savings, I guess. Okay, so that means here, these two terms are greater than these two terms. Yet the whole equation is still balanced. So what does that mean? Exports and imports, which one must be bigger?
Imports.
Okay, yeah, imports must be bigger than exports and make up the difference between G and net taxes and investment and savings. Does that make sense? Faith? Okay.
I realized you couldn't hear me. Yeah, I said imports as well.
Okay, good. Okay, good. All right. Okay. All right. Good. Any other questions from Unit 3? Okay, so in this unit, what I'm concerned of, because I've seen the most mistakes made, is just the calculations, right? How to calculate CPI and inflation rate and cost of baskets, and how to calculate real versus nominal GDP. Those equations I gave you in the video, I would encourage you to go back, study them. If you can't remember them, remember your 3x5 note card, write them down, but make sure you write them down correctly, right? Because CPI and the real GDP calculations look similar, but they're completely different. Yeah, Faith?
I have another question. It was from the quiz that we took.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I just did the calculations wrong or if I interpreted the calculations wrong.
Okay.
So it says, suppose the real gross domestic product equals 100 billion this year, and the nominal gross domestic product is 200 billion.
Okay.
This implies that the price level has increased by what percent? And apparently the answer is 100%. But when I did my calculations, I got 2 or 200, but I don't think I interpreted it properly. Either that or I just did the calculation wrong.
Okay, so if you got 200, then that means you got the, well, so yeah, so you calculated the change, the size of change in nominal divided by the size of change in real GDP, right? So here, if you remember, okay, now we said GDP price index or GDP deflator equals your nominal GDP minus real GDP, okay, divided by real GDP times 100. Okay, now this is probably the equation you used, but used incorrectly, because here in this question it did not tell you that nominal GDP is 200 billion and real GDP is 100 billion. It said the nominal GDP growth is 200 billion and real GDP growth is 100 billion, right? So that would have been, the growth, if this were the way you calculated, you put the change, the growth would be the change in here, and that's not correct, okay? So the change in these GDPs, okay, so the change in GDP price level, okay, that equals the change in, okay, let me hold on. Okay, so that equals, well, how do I put it in the, no, I think it would confuse you more if I put it in an equation form because it'll be too complicated. So the change in your price level, okay, equals the difference between your change in nominal and the change in real, okay? So if your nominal increased by 200 billion and real increased by 100 billion, then the difference there is how much your price level changed. Because remember, we said your nominal GDP, okay, is the current prices, right? Well, yeah. So let's just do this. The percentage in the change in nominal GDP is the percentage change in price level times plus the percentage change in real GDP. Okay, I guess this equation is simpler because we said nominal GDP is calculated with current prices times current production, right? With me so far, Faith? Okay, so for nominal GDP to change, there are two sources. It can be a price level change or it can be a production change. Now, real GDP measures production change. Then price level changes measure the price level changes. So here, okay, if your nominal GDP increased by 200 billion and your real GDP increased by 100 billion, then that means your price level must have made up the difference between the two, right? Because 100 billion increase in real GDP is how much your production actually went up, okay? But your real nominal GDP went up by 200 billion, so that means the rest of the difference is made up by price changes, okay? And so if you do the calculation that way, the question says, how much what's the price change in percentage, in nominal GDP versus real, then that means, well, price must have went up by 100% in percentage for the nominal versus the real. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining this very clearly, but remember this, right? The change in the nominal comes from the change in price plus the change in real, because nominal GDP is impacted by both price changes and production changes.
Okay, I think I'm gonna have to just rewatch this video.
Okay, all right.
Because I don't think it's clicking just yet, but okay.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Going along with nominal and real. I
Mm-hmm.
remember there was another question asking to calculate nominal given real GDP, and I had no idea what to do on that one because I remember the equation that the GDP price index
Same.
equals nominal or real, but I didn't know how
Yeah,
to do it.
so you gotta use this formula right here in that case, right? So if you want to calculate nominal GDP given real GDP, you gotta know GDP price index as well. You cannot calculate the nominal without knowing both real and the price index. Okay, but if you know the price index and real GDP, just plug into this equation, then you should be able to figure it out.
Yeah, but
Oh
one of the
wait, sorry,
questions on the quiz
I
didn't
just
have
remembered
that.
I wrote this one wrong. Sorry. It's not nominal GDP minus real, it's nominal over real. Whoops. Ah, I'll just redo this. Sorry about that. It's yeah, it's nominal GDP. Okay, yeah. I hope you didn't whoops write that down wrong. Okay, I'm glad you asked this question so I caught it. Okay, it's nominal GDP divided by real GDP times 100, right? So if I give you any two of these three things, you should be able to calculate the last one. Okay. Sorry, Connor, you were saying?
Right, and I understood that, but I remember there was one question that just said that the nominal GDP for, wait, I think it was the real. It said the real GDP for a country was like 4 million. And then it wanted to say, it was asking what the nominal GDP was.
Okay,
And
so
I didn't know what to do.
well, so if you don't have the price index, then the only possible scenario, because I have to look at the question to help you, but the only thing I can imagine in that case is that year is the base year, right? If it tells you that this year is the base year, real GDP is 4 million. What is nominal GDP? Well, we said in class that in the base year, your nominal GDP and real GDP are always the same, right? Because real GDP is calculated with base year prices, nominal GDP is calculated with current year prices. In the base year, the current year is the base year, right? So they're exactly the same. So that's the only scenario that's possible for that question to exist. Okay. All right, Josh?
Yeah, I think I remember that question, just how you said it.
Okay, good.
And also,
Yeah, I have that question up. It's for the base here.
Okay, perfect. Wow.
and also, I remember one question that said that the GDP was like 100 trillion or something, and then the next year it was 200, and it said what's the percentage change?
Okay.
And I chose 100%, but it said that the change was actually 200%. So I was just thinking
That can be right. Yeah, because the percentage change, so anytime you calculate a percentage change, it's called a growth rate. Oops.
Right.
Right, so a growth rate, there's a generic form, is always the new value of whatever you're looking at minus the old value divided by the old value times 100. Okay, so always stick with this, and if you actually did this correctly, then I would say that the answer is wrong, but I have to again look at the question to determine that. But whenever you calculate a percentage change in anything, okay, it's a growth rate, so just take the new value of that, whatever that thing you're looking at, minus the old value divided by old. So if it's a GDP growth rate, do new GDP minus old GDP divided by old GDP. If it's a price level growth rate, we call that inflation, so that's new price level minus old price level divided by old price level, right? So, but
Okay,
it's a very generic form.
Let me look it up and I'll get back to you in a minute or two.
Okay, all right. In the meantime, any other questions from Unit 3?
I have another.
Okay.
My question is on how to calculate national income and the personal income. I couldn't remember those equations.
Yeah, so those national income and personal income, the difference is the taxes, right? So because personal income is well, see, maybe it's not the taxes, but anyway, so those are more on the accounting side of things that I'm not interested in, and I think as long as you looked it over and made sense when you read it, that's good enough for me. I'm not gonna focus on that because I don't like accounting. No offense to your accounting majors. Okay. Yeah.
No,
So
the thing is, I couldn't find those in the reading,
you
so
couldn't
that's why
find
I had
those in the
trouble like
reading?
on the homework.
No, there should be. Yeah, there should be information in the chapter about it. Yeah, email me if you can't find it, and I'll see if I can tell you on which page you can look for it. Okay. All right, we're actually out of time. So Josh, if you want to, stick around for a few minutes, then I'll help you with that question. But the rest of you, you're free to go. Okay. So good luck on your test. Don't forget. You still have 45 more minutes to get your proctorial set up. I was hoping to end this early because I didn't think you guys, especially, didn't start with many questions. I didn't think this was going to last this long, but so take a couple minutes, do that quiz just to make sure your proctorial works, and then good luck on the test, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Okay?
Thanks, Brother Ma.
You're welcome.